Hey folks, it's Rob Flux here with another Sunday session and coming to you from a very different environment today, inside a renovation project that we've got happening underway. And so it's a little bit echoey, if you can just forgive that little, noise and that sort of thing. But today we're going to be talking to you all about asset protection and how to protect your assets as much as humanly possible. And in order to do that, we've got a very special guest. We've got Amanda Fayad from Alfa Legal Group. So Amanda, welcome.
Thank you.
So we're going to be talking all about asset protection, and all the different issues and challenges that actually sit around there, and the different phases that might actually impact people depending upon where they are on their property development journey. Because in the early days, if you have no assets, there's not much to protect. But as you start to collect some cash, then it probably starts to become a little bit more important as we go.
Absolutely.
So before we go too far, tell us a little bit about yourself and your organisation, Alfa Legal Group, and why you guys are the experts for us to be listening to today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So a little bit about me, you can probably tell right off the bat, I don't sound like an Aussie. I'm Canadian born and bred, but Australian educated in the legal industry. So I'm not running roughshod around contracts over here. And I've been in Australia. We're based on the Gold Coast in the Surfers Paradise area, and we've been here for about 7 years. Well, I've been here for 7 years. Our practice is a boutique practice, so we're not huge, which we like to see as a benefit, but we're not so small that we can't play with the big boys. We've got matters that are punching well above what I would say our boutique firm weight, and we get a really good outcome for our clients. But our bread and butter here is we really, really enjoy working with, when we say small and mid-sized enterprise, SMEs, we really enjoy working with that small end of the SME. So the moms and dads, the sole proprietors, the people who are either small in their business journey or just getting started in their business journey. And what we like to look after for folks is what we call the front end and the back end of all of their business matters. So front end is negotiating contracts, drafting contracts, putting asset protection plans together from the beginning. And then on the other end, the back end is if you have a problem, you need to instigate litigation against somebody, or unfortunately somebody's brought something against you. We've got a department that deals with that as well. In terms of, why are we the folks to be talking to you today? At any given time, we have a handful of active developers on our books, so to speak, with active matters in place, whether we're building something for them or handling a problem for them. But over the course of the last few years, we've dealt with countless, actually, developers, everything ranging from a person who's just having a crack at it for the very first time, and this is their first foray into the property investment and development field, through to people who are doing this as a business and doing big multi-million-dollar apartment builds. But for the most part, we've kind of settled on that 1 into 2, 2 into 4, those sort of multiplex type folks who are doing a handful of projects in a year, or maybe 1 or 2 in a year. And that seems to be the type of client that's come around to us. And over the course of time, we've noticed a lot of common themes in the challenges that type of client faces, and a lot of things that are common in terms of what they need across the board. So we've managed to, over the course of time, kind of create a hit list of what somebody who might fall into that category should look out for and keep their eyes open to and ask a professional about.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Well,
today we're going to be talking about asset protection in particular, and so it's worthwhile, mentioning to everybody out there that if you're looking for asset protection, then absolutely you want to be talking to your solicitor. If you're looking for tax minimization, then you need to be talking to your accountant, and yet they will both give you advice on your entity structures, and sometimes that advice is complementary and sometimes it's in conflict with each other. So it's really, really, really important that you get your consultants to be talking hand in glove with each other to make sure that you've got the cohesive end-to-end solution. That said, we're just going to concentrate on just one of those elements today, being the asset protection. And so I guess a lot of people coming into this one of their biggest concerns right up front is what entity should I actually be creating my development in? And there's a number of different structures out there. So there's personal name, there's companies, there's trust with corporate trustees, there's trust with personal trustees, and it can get somewhat convoluted and overwhelming. So what I want to try and do is just kind of break it down for people into the smallest of elements, get them to actually understand, and then we can then go, well, how and where might you start to apply some of these things? So with your permission, Amanda, why don't you tell us a little bit about, I guess, the entity that is the human and why that is or is not a good idea to actually do things in your own personal name.
Absolutely. So just before we get started, this is just a little disclosure that I have to put out there. So I can't actually offer specific legal advice right now. I can talk about general principles and the things that a person needs to look for. But in terms of anybody's particular circumstances, when it comes to what will or won't work for them, I'm offering, some general information from a lawyer's perspective based on what we've seen and what we do. But I can't say, and you shouldn't take this information as being what's right for you. If you want to know what is or isn't right for you, you can reach out to us, or you can reach out to the solicitor that you trust, that you have in your network. But make sure that whenever you're getting advice, you're getting it from somebody who knows your specific circumstances. So on that note, we're talking about separate legal entities. So a human being, a person, is considered a legal entity. And interestingly enough, a company, a corporation, so a PDY LTD, is also a legal entity, and it acts in terms of how it's viewed. I mean, there's different tax structures that will apply across the board. And the Corporations Act will govern rules about a company. But in terms of what's kind of considered a person from legal purposes, a human and a company are a legal entity. Now, the other thing that people often use and gets thrown around in terms of asset protection and company structures are trusts. To be really clear, a trust is not a legal entity. That's why it needs a trustee. And a trustee can be a person, like a human person, or it can be a corporation, a corporate trustee. It needs a legal entity, person or a corporation, to operate it. So in a sense, a trust is kind of like the puppet, and either you, the person, or a human being, or a company is the puppeteer that operates that trust and gives it the ability to own something. Because, for example, if a person's under 18 years old, they may not be able to legally enter into a contract because they're not a legal entity yet at that age. So a trust all by its own self can't actually do things all by itself. It needs to do something with that person as trustee on its behalf. So that's kind of the three main legal entities the two legal entities and the three structures that come into play most often.
But that most come into play. There is, I guess, a fourth one, which is, self-managed super funds. For the majority of instances, people won't be doing developments in self-managed super funds, primarily because SMSFs can't borrow in order to develop. And it's not many SMSFs that have enough cash to go and do the development in cash.
It's a little bit more complex. I mean, it's not impossible for it to be done, and there are folks out there that do it. But, if we're talking, that's like level expert. That's very sophisticated, very experienced, cashed up, and that's definitely a few steps down the road. So yes, absolutely, it's a thing, but we're into like expert territory there.
And for the purposes of today, we're going to say that most of our audience is not that sophisticated yet. But if they, have delusions of grandeur and want to get there and are actually on their path, then they certainly know where to reach out and go, how do we squeeze the lemon just that little bit harder? Okay, so the concept of asset protection, I guess I will kind of paint the picture here for our audience to say, one of the challenges that we face as developers is the fact that most of us forget the fact that when we are constructing something, we have an ongoing warranty liability with that construction element, depending upon the state that you're in, could be anywhere up to 6 years after the project has actually completed. So you might be building something and sell that. You might be cashed up and then move on and spend the cash. And then all of a sudden the foundations start to sink, or the roof starts to leak, or something along those lines that has been unforeseen. And all of a sudden the ultimate buyer who bought it off of us then wants to tap us on the shoulder and go, hey, this thing isn't working like it should do. Now, a lot of us think that that they would go directly to the builder, but it was because the developer sold it to the ultimate buyer. The developer is actually the one that gets tapped on the shoulder first, isn't that right?
Yeah, that is the case. And unfortunately, what happens in a lot of circumstances is the developer can end up being liable at first instance. And if you end up on the hook for something and end up having to pay or end up having a judgment made against you, that's your obligation. And then you've got to go then tap the builder on the shoulder and then try and recover from them. And everybody's heard these stories of these fly-by-night, dodgy builders that they're here today, they're gone tomorrow, phoenixing problems. And you go to tap somebody on the shoulder and there's no shoulder to tap on. So you're left holding the bag. And
at a best case scenario, in the middle of two legal things, one with the owner and one with the builder. And as a worst case scenario, you're just stuck with the can.
Exactly. So, I mean, there's ways to protect yourself from those circumstances, and make sure that you insulate not only your other projects, if you've got any going on, your personal assets and yourself personally, but just reducing headache. That's primarily why you'd want to have asset protection in place right off the bat.
Absolutely, which is one of the reasons why when we talk about, I guess, the three different entities, we talk about person, company, and a trust. I guess one of the reasons why doing something in your own name, not me giving advice here, but it doesn't seem to be like a good idea.
I'm going to say that doing something in your own name is probably the scariest thing that I see. So I'm not saying that there's never a time where putting a thing or a project in your own name is the worst thing that you can do, but just generally speaking, if you've got something tied to your name personally and that thing goes pear-shaped or something with it goes pear-shaped, that's going to chase you and follow you around like a bad smell. So unless you're particularly interested in, filing for bankruptcy, if you've got a $3 million problem that shows up on your doorstep, or figuring out a way to pay that off, a person would want to make sure that whatever they're doing in business, and that's why there's that, they call it the corporate veil in the Corporations Act that separates the person from the company. When I have people show up and they're doing everything individually in their own name, I quake in my space boots. I hate it. It's scary.
So not advice, but bad.
Again, yeah, not advice, but just generally speaking, that's an opportunity, that's a liability waiting to happen.
Absolutely, and especially if you've got assets in your own personal name, if you've got your principal place of residence, or maybe some investment properties and that sort of thing that are in your name, the ability for that to come cascading down into, I guess, everything that you own starts to become really, really scary.
It's a butterfly effect, so, and this is just a broad hypothetical. I'll use myself as an example. So let's just say I own a house, and I think it's a great idea. I'm going to go invest and buy a meat packing business. I don't know where that came from, but meat packing business. I'm craving steak for dinner. I think that's where it's coming from. So meat packing business, right? And I go ahead and I go put somebody in there as an operator of that meat packing business, but I own that business in my own name. Turns out that operator is dodgy and shady. They're stealing money. They're not paying, the superannuation for the employees. And then all of a sudden I get a knock on my door and I find out that this meat packing business has a $3 million obligation somewhere. And now I've spent my whole life working to go build a home that I own with my husband, and we've got a little bit of equity in it. And now all of a sudden I'm sitting there with my name personally on it and no other way to escape. And I've got a $3 million problem that if it's in my own name, that's it. I'm hooped. I'm giving them my house. I am giving whoever's knocking on my door my house. If I don't have that in savings, you can have my house, or I'm going bankrupt. And then, well, someone's going to end up with my house anyway. You just don't want to be in that position.
Let's not do that. So that's probably
Don't buy a meat packing plant in your own name.
Or any other, I guess, any other enterprise, for want of a better word, where there is risk involved, that's probably the biggest element, is that everything that we're doing involves risk, and it's about managing that risk all the way through. And so asset protection is a mechanism to manage the risk.
Yes, absolutely. So asset protection, in our earlier chats, it's a shield, not a sword. Just because you've got your assets covered doesn't mean you'd want to go out there and start taking unnecessary risks. So for example, just because you're wearing a helmet on your motorcycle doesn't mean that, that gives you a license to start doing wheelies and burnouts. It means that in the event something bad happens, you're more likely to get away with less of an injury. So having asset protection in place is your helmet. That's your shield, but it doesn't mean start popping business wheelies and taking unnecessary risks.
Absolutely. So speaking of taking risks and that sort of thing, so there is a concept called the person of substance and person of straw. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is, and specifically in reference to the fact that you said before that there's a human person and there's also the entity, the corporate entity is also deemed to be a person?
All right, so let's break this one down. Anybody who's been around business for a little bit, or listened to some business mentors or Richard Branson online, or anybody has probably heard the expression own nothing, control everything. What the heck does that, like, what does that even mean? So a person of substance and a person of straw. Break this down simply. So if you're the person who owns everything, so house in your name, car in your name, investment property in your name, you're that person of substance. If we go look you up on whatever register, we're going to see A, B, C, D, E associated to your name, that you're a person with substance. A person of straw, so if you're familiar with agriculture at all, straw is like it's like a little stick and it's kind of hollow in the middle. So there's a shell around it and it's hollow. So the person of straw, their name isn't attached directly to that car, that house, that investment property. They own it, so to speak, but legally speaking, on paper, they themselves as a person don't own it. So maybe a company owns it, or maybe a trust owns it, so that you've got a corporate trustee and it's in the name of the trust, but you control that trust. So you're controlling that thing. You can do whatever the heck you want with that thing. But if somebody looks that thing up, it's not going to come back right to you personally. So straw is a little bit hollow. And in terms of protecting a person's assets, especially if, we're taking risks in business, and to be honest with you, there's no such thing as risk-free business. It really doesn't matter how clever and well-structured you are, the unforeseen can happen. So if we're taking risks or we're in business, the more person of straw that you are, the less attached you as an individual person are to your business, your investments, your assets, the less likely that you're going to have that hypothetical $3 million bad smell knock on your front door.
So if we, I guess, dumb that down even further, the person of straw is the one that takes the risk, and the person of substance is the one who collects the cash.
Right. So if we to take and elaborate on that, I love that actually. I'm gonna put that in my book to as
my book now. It's co-authored.
All right. Okay. I gotta pay you a quarter. I gotta pay 20 cents every time I say it. So effectively, what you want to do is that person who takes the risk. When Rob says person, we don't mean grab your cousin Bill and slap him on there and say, well, stuff you, Bill. You screwed me over when we were kids. So if there's going to be someone who's copying it, it's going to be you. No, we're not stuffing Bill. That's not what we mean by the person who takes the risk. The person is the legal entity. So the non-human thing that is qualified as a legal entity, that's the risk taker. Yeah. And that's the cool thing about the Corporations Act and the laws and the way that companies and trusts operate in Australia, is that a thing that's not a human can actually take on risk without that risk coming back and slapping you in the face. And that's called the corporate veil. So it's kind of like a curtain that falls between you and a company, and everything on this side of the curtain is the risk that goes to the company. And you're over here saying, thank you very much for my pay. Thank you very much for my money. And bad smell, you stay over there on that side of the curtain.
Very good. And we've spoken a lot about the person, folks. but just as a summary, the person is not necessarily a human. It is a corporate entity of some description, I guess, where we're trying to get to here. So, okay, so we understand that, I guess, a person of substance is going to be somebody keeping the cash, and a person of straw is going to be one that's going to be taking the risk. So when we're putting together our structures, we need to start to be thinking about that with regards to, well, who is actually doing the development, because the development is a risky thing. That sounds logically like where the person of straw should sit. And then where the profits are then paid to then appear to be logical to go to the person of substance. So if we break those down into their small elements, I guess the development itself, should we do that in the one entity over and over and over? And if so, why would we do that? Or should we not do that? Should we set one up for every single project as we go?
Well, that's a good question. It's a deep one. So broadly speaking, taking one big company and setting everything up in it is potentially inherently risky for a couple of different reasons. So I'll answer it in two parts. So if you have one company, you're like, right, this is going to be my development entity, and every time I develop something, apples and oranges, Pty Ltd, that's going to be the person doing it. There's potential tax implications that come with that, potential GST implications that come with that. So I'm not a tax advisor. That's something that we could work with, or you should work with your accountant to understand. So slapping everything under one corporate entity can create undesirable tax effect. B, if you've got two different developments going on at one time, so say we're doing a duplex over here and a duplex over here, and this one's excellent. It's going gangbusters. Everything's going great with duplex project A. But duplex project B is just cursed. And all of a sudden, you've got a lawsuit on your hands. Heaven forbid you've got a lawsuit on your hands with duplex project B. If the same corporate entity owns or is developing both of those projects, you could end up toppling the good one, the one that's working out really, really well, with problems and financial issues that are attached to the one that's going pear-shaped. So generally speaking, no matter how many entities are put together, and that's going to depend on a person by person circumstance, but you want to create a division. So it's kind of like in a cruise ship, where if they've got bulkheads in the bottom of that cruise ship, so that if the ship gets punctured and this part starts leaking, it doesn't sink the whole boat. They've got those fire doors, those bulkheads in between.
Unless it's the Titanic.
Okay, but the problem with the Titanic was that they didn't put them all the way to the top. They just figured nothing would fill all the way to the top. So here, we'll just put a half wall in. Like, no, we're not doing the Titanic half wall thing. It's a sealed fire door all the way to the top. So in terms of entities, you want to have that clear division between things, so that the risk from one project or development doesn't flow on and potentially overflow into another one. You want to keep them apart.
Yeah, and for, I guess, the common vernacular that people start to reference that is called an SPV, or a special purpose vehicle. So it's set up specifically for the purpose of that particular project.
Yeah, so we've seen a lot of our developers, if they've got one on Elkhorn Avenue, they'll put together, Elkhorn Queensland Pty Ltd, so that when they're doing all their accounting and everything, they can keep it straight that, like, oh yes, that's for this project here on 123 Elkhorn Avenue. We see that a lot. And some people just use really fun names. This is where people get crafty. We've seen like Banana Boat as that's not the exact name, but it's similar to that. We've seen people use funny things like that, and often they'll have it with some reference to the project that they're doing. But one size doesn't fit all. It's not a great idea usually.
Yeah, so just, I guess, a side tangent, because we're talking about naming conventions. I've gone through 3 or 4 different naming conventions for my entities. And in the early days, I had delusions of grandeur of every single project in some way, shape or form saying the word Flux without people actually recognizing it.
Flux.
So, for example, 88 miles per hour, which happens to be the speed that the DeLorean hits in order to kick in the flux capacitor, those sorts of things. So very obscure, obtuse ways of actually saying the word flux. But after a while, you start to run out of things that are not Back to the Future references.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
Okay.
It's anyway. So don't do that, folks, because you start to run out of ideas. But I guess a easy one that I found that because over time, as you start collecting your projects, you're going to forget which particular entity name belongs to which particular project, and your accountant's going to get confused and that sort of thing. So easy one is if you've got a project at 123 XYZ Street, then 123 XYZ Proprietary Limited is usually a pretty unique name at ASIC and makes it very easy for everybody. So that's kind of how I default to mine nowadays.
We see that a lot. That's what we see most commonly. It also helps us keep it straight as well when we have somebody, we've got someone who's a member of your group who does a lot of business with us, and they've got a handful of things going on at any given time. And when I'm talking with my property expert colleague that's here, I'm like, which one of his is this one? And he goes, well, it's that one. Obviously, the name's in it. All right. Okay. So it helps your lawyer and your accountant keep it straight too.
Absolutely. So, okay. So we're talking about setting up an SPV or a special purpose vehicle for each and every project. Do we shut that down so we haven't even spoke about what kind of entity it is yet, but would we want to shut that down the moment that the project is over? Yes or no?
Loaded question. You got me on my toes today. So that's going to depend. So here's the most lawyer answer of life. It depends. It's like, how long is a piece of string? Well, half as long as twice its length. So, all right, think about that one slow. But it depends. So there's a number of factors that'll play a role in it. So are you going to end up selling off the entire project? Is that the goal? Are you going to plan on keeping the whole thing for yourself? Maybe everybody in your family gets to live in there and you're keeping the whole thing. Or are you going to sell some and keep some? That's going to play a role in whether or not at the end of the day, everything's built and done, whether that company or that entity that's holding it gets wrapped up and deregistered. Broadly speaking, yep, sorry, go ahead.
No, which perfectly lands with the point I was about to make, which is always start with the end in mind. If you know how you intend to exit the deal, that will change how you actually set up your structure in the first place.
But what if you don't know how you're going to exit the deal? Or what if something changes in the middle?
Then I'm sure that some legal advice would give them some more flexible solutions.
I
know what solution to go with, but I'm not allowed to tell the lovely people out there what that looks like. But yes, I guess if my intention is to shut everything down and sell everything off, then I guess it doesn't make any real sense to keep that entity alive post it paying its tax obligations and that sort of thing, because then you shut it down and you can get the hell out of Dodge and get rid of that ongoing warranty obligation as quick as humanly possible. If your intention is to keep some stock, then maybe we need to be a little bit more creative with regards to which entity owns it and which entity develops it.
Definitely. So what we see a lot is even where folks are actually planning to, where we have arrangements where somebody owns the piece of land or owns it, but somebody else is developing it or a different entity is developing it, we'll see multiple entity structures in place where the owner is different than the developer, even though there might be the same human being behind all of it. That's a way to mitigate risk. We see that a lot when we have people in sort of joint venture type arrangements where somebody comes in who puts in the money, who's your JV partner, as I hear around the industry a lot, and somebody else is doing the development itself. So in terms of having a different one who owns it, different one being different entity versus one who develops it, most commonly we see that, and it may be a more flexible way if, for example, from the beginning, you plan on selling off the whole thing, but then partway through you fall in love with the project and you want to keep one. It's slightly more complicated to start up. And when I say slightly more complicated, I don't mean for you, the person, I mean, the lawyer will have to deal with it for you. It's a little bit more of a setup for them, but they're equipped to deal with that. But that creates the most flexible opportunity for you. If you decide to set something up where the same person owns as develops, and then you wrap the project up and you close and you're intending to close a company, but then later you decide you want to keep something, then you're looking at potential stamp duty issues and having to transfer it from here to there so that you can close off a company and mitigate liability. Generally speaking, starting with the end in mind is, of course, the right thing to do. No question about that. But also having a broader view to, what if I change my mind? So you need to take into consideration, is there a way that I can set this up flexible enough that if I change my mind, I can still get what I want at the end of it and have my assets covered?
And in doing something like that, it's going to be almost certainly going to be a little bit more complex structure with potentially a hybrid with multiple entities that might actually sit together, and some documentation talking between each other, which I'll let you talk to in a sec. But the insurance policy of setting that cost up front on the just in case I might do something later on is very worthwhile versus, hey, I get to the end and I have to pay stamp duty to shuffle it across and a few other things like that to go, there's some transactional costs that might happen at the tail. So if you're not really sure, go to the effort of actually putting the more complex structure in place to give you the flexibility. If you are very certain in what you want, then you just go to exactly what you need.
Absolutely. And I think that comes with experience for a person. So one of the things that we see most often, not just with our developer clients, but across the board, is we'll tell somebody, look, you should probably start out with a partnership agreement when you get into business with your best friend. No, we've been friends for 20 years. I don't want to spend $5,000 on this document and that document. And we're like, okay, but it's a lot cheaper to spend $5,000 today than $50,000 when you all have a fight, 6 months down the road. It'll never happen. It happens. That old expression, good fences make good neighbors, it kind of falls under that category. And what we see a lot with developers, especially early into that journey, is people are often doing things and without condescending anybody, on a shoestring. Like they're having a red hot crack, and they're doing it as conservatively as possible when they just get going. So the idea of, should I go spend a few $1,000s to go get this structure built for me when I can just, be a cowboy and Yahoo it? Most people are like just firing from all angles. Most people in early days, unless they've been burnt in the past with something else, they don't see that as an investment. But those are the very same folks that then come back to us later. And I love expressions. I'm a big analogy person. There's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole. So when the guns are blazing and the bombs are falling, doesn't matter how much you are an atheist, everybody goes, please God, help me survive this one. So the person who didn't want to set stuff up right to begin with, they come back to you and they go, please, lawyer, bail me out of this. I'm stuffed. And your $2,000 early investment would have saved you a $20, $30, $40, $100,000 problem down the road. So it's prevention.
And I guess the way to, approach this is to not think of it as an actual cost, but rather to think of it as an investment, and more specifically as an insurance policy. We're more than happy to put insurance on our car. We're more than happy to put insurance on our house in the hope that nothing goes wrong. And we don't think anything about that. But when it comes to our business expenses, somehow it's suddenly, we're not wanting to do this exact same thing. It's really just having that different mindset to go, look, I'm spending the money hoping that I never need to make the claim. But if I do, it's money well invested. And I'll use the cost that you just threw out there. If it costs you $2,000 to set it up front, and it's going to have a $30,000 implication, you could run 15 projects at $2,000 a go, and any one of those 15 projects goes south, and you have that flexibility in place already, and you're still at break even.
That's kind of the point. It's kind of like going to the dentist. Nobody really is super urgent about missing a tooth cleaning appointment, because I'll get to it. You should do it. You get to it eventually. But let me tell you, when you've got a toothache and that thing's hurting and keeping you up at night, you're straight into the dentist's chair. But and so that's effectively what we're talking about. So to be clear, when we're talking about $2,000 could save you 30, we're just using hypotheticals here. We could say $2 could save you 10, hypothetically speaking, just so that nobody gets excited and thinks, wow, I can engineer my whole thing for $2,000. So just to be clear.
Yeah, I just threw the educational in nature, not advice.
Love that disclaimer.
So we're talking very conceptually here, and I guess where we can understand that we can't give actual advice, but if somebody had the clear intention that they wanted to exit everything at the very end and not hold any stock at all, what would be an appropriate structure from a cost effectiveness perspective, and what would be the insurance policy structure, if they're not quite sure?
So if a person were experienced, knew exactly what they were doing, there's no way that they're changing their mind. This is it. Realistically speaking, I'd put it this way. If I were, let's just say, buying a business that I only, and I knew this for certain, was keeping for 6 months, and I was going to be done with it after that, I'd buy that business in the name of a particular entity name. And then when I've gone ahead and sold that business and finished with it, I'd want to be done with that entity. Number one, I don't want to have to keep paying ASIC renewal fees every single year, lodging BASs, so business activity statements, paying my accountant to do the preparation on it. I had a client come in who had like 7 inactive entities, and at $2,000 a pop to their accountant to just simply do the annual tax return of 0. I'm like, that's
nil return.
That's just pissing into the wind at that point. Why are you doing this? So realistically speaking, if you're done with the project and you're done with the thing, and the specific vehicle that you set up for that project no longer has a purpose, then if it's a specific purpose vehicle and the purpose is finished, then finish up with the company, wrap it up, pay your obligations, make sure your taxes, everything's all buttoned up nice, speak with your accountant, and move on. Because if you take that entity and you go drag that one into another project, you're leaving yourself a little bit dangling in the air there in case something goes wrong with project number 1. Now you're bringing that bad smell over to project number 2. So it's something to be really careful about.
So just in summary there, make sure that I've actually captured it correctly. Special purpose vehicle for the particular project. If we are very certain that we're wanting to exit it, then a company set up that we then collapse at the end is a nice, cheap, effective way to actually do that, so long as we close it down at the end. That gets us out of the way, so the ultimate buyer has nobody to come and chase. Is that kind of how I've wrapped that up?
Look, broadly speaking, I'm not saying that there would never be a circumstance where something couldn't come back on you, and that's where different asset protection structures come into place. But just in a very simple, very broad form, yeah, broadly speaking, yes.
Very good. So then the converse of that is the opposite. Hey, we want to keep something, or we're not quite sure if we want to keep something. And we want to, if we're going to keep something, having separation between the assets that we keep, so the person of substance, and the development itself, the person of straw, having them as 2 separate entities then starts to make sense. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, if you did a 4-pack and you're really in love with the project and you feel like keeping one, whether you want to live in it or you want to keep it for yourself as a rental investment, probably not a good idea to own that investment property or that principal place of residence in the same entity that did the development. So same kind of story as before. If you, for example, this one might hit a home run, but if you've got a leaky roof or a defective roof on a property, and it happens to be the house that you're living in, and that entity that owns it is also the one that built it, well, unfortunately, you're the one, it's like the snake eating its own tail. You're the one who's holding the bag on all ends of it. So if there's insurance associated to it, you're paying that excess personally. So you probably don't want to do that.
Yeah. So folks, Amanda very politely just had a go at me for my very, very first project with the story that I told her beforehand, where I did a development entity where we built 8 dwellings, and I managed to keep a couple of those at the end. And of course, the only leaky roof was my leaky roof, and I kept that property in the same entity that did the development. And so one of the challenges in that regard is I was the one who was responsible for the warranty obligation. And in my instance, the builder had gone broke after the project. So there was no builder for me to go and chase. And the homeowner's warranty insurance does not protect the developer, folks. And so if you're owning it in your own name, you can't make a claim. And so, yeah, I was stuck. So don't do that.
I was trying to use a hypothetical discrete example. I wasn't trying to out you, but I mean, you did it, not me. So.
Yes, that's okay. Look, Amanda, I'm more than happy to own my mistakes. I guess this is about trying to help everybody else along the way on their journey so they don't make the same mistakes as I did.
School fees, we collect tuition.
Correct. I've collected a lot of tuition along the way. Let's just say that. But that's how we learn and we grow and we move on. Okay, so I guess what you're talking about there is, I guess, an entity that you are looking to keep it in and an entity that you're looking to develop it in, 2 separate entities. So noting, if we look at the 2 entities, I guess, for their own merits, the entity that we want to keep it in, if we're going to keep this asset for a very long period of time, it makes sense that at some point in time, it's likely to have some sort of capital gain. And whilst we're not talking tax advice here, because we're talking legal, if we kept it in a company, we'd have no discount on our capital gain if we kept it for a long period of time. But if we held it in a trust, as an example, then there's the potential that if we hold it long enough, we would get that 50% capital gains tax discount. So is that a likely outcome for the entity that owns the stock at the end?
This is another how long is a piece of string question, isn't it? So again, it depends. My advice would be, sorry, not advice, but my explanation, my education on this would be, there's that disclaimer again.
It's going to keep coming back.
Sorry, if you're not sure whether or not you plan to keep something in the long run or in the short run, and it may or may not be an option in the course of the development, or you intend to keep something, whether you end up doing that or not, generally speaking, you want the flexibility. Excuse me, I'm trying not to die here. You want the flexibility of having that separation option. So better to set it up that way to begin with than having to deal with trying to fuddle fart around after the fact to try and find a way to creatively tax optimize or try to find a way to minimize stamp duty. Better to just a little bit of extra time and effort to begin with to put it together. And then when you do that 2 entity structure, developer entity versus potential property owner entity, that comes with a number of other agreements. So even though ultimately behind the scenes, you might be in charge of those 2 entities, those 2 entities are going to have some contracts between each other. So entity A might have an agreement, a development agreement with entity B, or might have some sort of the leasing agreement between the 2. Not saying specifically which one it would be, but necessarily there's going to be some sort of documentation between those 2 legal entities. So that's where there's a little bit of more work to begin with. To answer Rob's question and not do the politician around the bush thing, in terms of long-term implications for capital gains savings or capital gains optimization, we really want to look at, to begin with, you want to try as best as possible to contemplate as many circumstances as you can think of. So, for example, if you were coming to us and you weren't sure, we'd say, all right, here's what we'll get you to do. We want you to go to your accountant, and here's an advice. Here's some 3 different options that we're going to give you. We'll put that in writing for you. Go take that advice, go to your accountant, and go get some tax advice on option A, B, and C. Get them to put that in writing for you, bring it back to us. We'll explain that to you. We'll go through it with you. And then based on what your long-term objectives are, based on what your potential objectives might be, we'll say, all right, here's a structure that pigeonholes you into this, pros and cons. Here's a structure that pigeonholes you into that, pros and cons. Here's a flexible structure. Maybe it's not the best here and it's not the worst there, but it might give you, the best of both worlds, so to speak. And if you want flexibility, that's your one. If you want maximum optimization on tax based on what your accountant said, that's your one. So it's a collaborative process between you, your lawyer, and your accountant. And I both love and hate accountants because, like, when I have accountants who come, I've got folks who come to me and their accountant has set up like a dozen different structures and they're all like all over the place and they've set it up for tax optimization, but legally speaking, it's left the person just flapping in the wind. It makes me cringe. And then when I've got a person who's come to me who's had a lawyer set everything up, but there's zero tax advice on it, and we get to the end of a project and then they get harpooned, that's not good either. So in terms of doing this one entity, two entity, the agreements between flexible, not flexible, your lawyer and your accountant need to be buddies and they need to talk to each other. And if you don't have an accountant, specifically a strategic accountant, if you've just got a bean counter who's counting your money and submitting tax returns, you might want to look at somebody who's a strategic accountant, who's going to help you plan for the future, and someone who will pick up the phone and talk to your lawyer as well. Because without that mutual relationship, nobody wants to get harpooned. It's no fun. I've been harpooned. I don't like it.
Yeah, well, so I have not yet. So I'm going to try and avoid that. I would add to that, not only do you want your solicitor and your, accountant to be working together, but you also then need to sanity check that with your financier to make sure that the structuring that you're putting together is actually capable of being funded. That's super, super important. Don't try to do that at the very last second. Understand their constraints, because there are some particular structures that residential funding just doesn't cater with. And when you go to the commercial world, they might deal with that, but maybe your project is too small. So you need to understand where your source of funding is actually coming from, and have that anointed appropriately as and where appropriate.
Absolutely, that's third prong for sure.
Very good. Now, so I think we've got a little bit of a concept as to, what do we do if we're going to flip it? What do we do if we're going to potentially keep some stock? There's also, circumstances where potentially you touched on it before, potentially we're going to do a joint venture with someone. And so we want to look after our side, and no doubt they want to look after their side. The two sides may not necessarily have the same tax requirements. So there's, what owns the structure, and then there's the structure itself, and what owns it on one side and what owns it on the other side might be completely different. So what I have for my tax advantage and what they have on theirs, who cares, right?
Their thing doesn't matter to you. You do what works for you, and they've got to look after theirs.
Correct. So how would you potentially put together a joint venture? What kind of entities and complexities and documentation might we be looking at for something like that?
Okay, so JVs are fun. First of all, the most common thing that we see is we've got somebody who's sort of your equity partner, someone who's putting in the sweat equity, and then we've got your money partner. So it's not a partnership, it's a JV. So the equity partner could be, Bananas and Oranges Pty Ltd. And the investing partner, the money partner, could be somebody's self-managed superannuation fund, or a company, or a lender. It could be anything. So often when we have two people coming together, what they'll do is they'll create a whole separate company. And that whole separate company will effectively own the project, but may not necessarily own the land. It'll own the project. So there's a difference between owning the property, the physical property, and I suppose the rights to the project and the profits that come out of the project. So I can get into some pretty complex legal jargon, but easiest to identify this is when you come in or you go into your lawyer and you sit down, tell them, look, I'm doing this and Bob over here is doing this. Fantastic. And you can put a little chart together. And what we usually like to do is figure out exactly what entity you belong to, what entity they belong to, and then give you some advice around, well, first of all, don't put that in your personal name. Maybe you want to put this in an umbrella company that owns a sub company, and that's the one who's doing the development on this project. So we've done JV agreements that go together that end up having, effectively, there's two people involved, but it'll have 4 or 5 different entities. So depending on how deep and how careful a person wants to be with their asset protection, and we can advise on that, but that's a custom process. Tell your lawyer your objectives, and they should be able to take that objective, that goal, and then crystal ball a little bit what you're doing and translate that into a structure that works. Then that's got to pass the sniff test. Before you go ahead and launch that, they'll should put together an organization chart for you. Go put it past the accountant. Go put it past your financier. If you get a tick box from both of those folks, great. Then come back to your lawyer and have them build the thing.
Very good. So all of that is if we're coming in and wanting to run some projects along the way. But in many, many, many instances, we see people who, I guess, decide halfway through their life that they want to become a property developer, and they've collected a whole bunch of assets beforehand. So some investment properties, a PPR, a whole bunch of stuff that they collected before they ever thought about the idea of taking risk in this property development game. And most of them, I see in many instances, are in their own personal name or in joint names with their spouse. What can we do to protect the stuff that we've already got without going through huge amounts of expenses in paying stamp duties and transfers and all sorts of things like that?
Yeah, so those people scare me the most. And when I say scare me, I don't mean they're scary. I mean, they give me the most anxiety because they've got the most to lose. So if a person has nothing to lose and they're just starting out, if you do it wrong and things go pear-shaped, well, if you don't have anything, they can't take anything from you. But if you spent your whole life acquiring things, and things go pear-shaped, you've got something to lose. And in an instant, and I've seen it happen. So many people this happened to during COVID or the GFC, that everything starts out great, they're exposed, and then kaboom, they lose it all and they're starting from zero. And sometimes these people are in their 50s. Like, it's not like you're 25 or 30 years old at that point, and it's like, well, you've got your whole career ahead of you. When you lose your entire life's buildup in your 50s, that's a blow. That's hard. So there are different asset protection structures that are out there. So number one, we've talked generally about sort of keeping you as a person separate from, a trust or a company. So I'd say asset protection level 1 is what we see most often. It's where a person has a corporate trustee, so a company, and then some sort of a trust. And then they might have that in duplicate where one's a developer and one's the owner. But typically we see this 2-pronged thing, which is some sort of a trustee that's a corporation and some sort of a trust. So that's good. That is generally a half decent asset protection measure. And often accountants will even put that together. But what I really encourage people to understand is accountants, while they can put together a trust for you and they can put together a company for you, they're not trained and they shouldn't be giving legal advice. And sometimes they kind of tippy-toe into that region about what the implications that might be for you in terms of overall, how's the rest of your life exposed? There are circumstances where even though you've done this particular structure, if things go really bad or things even go medium bad, it is possible, it's not always the case, but it's possible that asset protection structure could be effectively useless. And you could still lose everything. It might be harder for that to happen, but it can still happen. Then we've got asset protection level 2. Asset protection, and there's only 2 levels, so it's not like there's 10 phases. 2 levels that I'm talking about today. Asset protection level 2 is a series of legal instruments that work together that go around those other structures. So the beauty of this second layer of asset protection is you could have your structures set up to be perfectly tax optimized, and it might not be the most asset protected way. That's fine. trying to go re-engineer each one of those structures to protect the assets. And this is where Rob said early, sometimes the best tax structure is not the best protection structure. And trying to make those things work together sometimes can be impossible. So there is a way, and it's something that, when we're asked about it, we often like to present to our clients to actually have a structure that's just like a bubble wrap that goes all the way around it. So go ahead, go out there and set everything up with your accountant for the best possible tax optimization for you, the best possible way of making sure that you can obtain the funding you need. You don't have to change that structure. You can just bring it to us. It might not be the way we would have set it up, but that's okay. Bring it to us, and then we can bubble wrap around it with something we call the vault. We're not the only firm on the planet that does it. I think we're probably the only one that calls it that. But it's just a series of legal instruments that go around your world. So not just this company, not just this development, goes around your whole world, and it gives you that asset protection.
Now, I guess having had you walk through some of that with me a little bit earlier, I understand that the complexity of going into that in, I guess, a forum like this is probably not that appropriate. But it does involve one particular kind of entity that a lot of people may have heard of, but not necessarily understand. It's called a testamentary trust. So I want to just talk to what is a testamentary trust and what is the advantage of that over a normal, typical discretionary trust?
Absolutely. So a testamentary trust is sort of like a highly specialized subcategory of discretionary trust. So what a testamentary trust is, so think testament, think last will and testament. So what it is it's a special trust that's built that works hand in hand with your will, your last will and testament. So you can't just take a will and then say, okay, I've got a will, and then slap it together with this trust. They have to be drafted together. So they work in concert, okay? So you could have an existing will already, that's fine. You can go take everything that's important in there and then have the lawyer who understands how to do this transpose it into a testamentary trust will. So these things talking to each other. Point A here corresponds with point 1 there. And how that works is this is that sort of second layer of protection. And without getting into the absolute nitty-gritty of the technicality, is a testamentary trust effectively is a trust that is your living estate. So while you're alive, whoever the trustee of that trust is, that is fine. It could be you, it could be a company, but that's your living estate. When you die, a lot of people have it set up in their will that they want their executor to go ahead and say they've got 3 kids and 6 grandchildren, that they want a trust to get set up for each one of those people so their portion of the estate can go into that trust. This is actually setting it up early before you die. There's benefits to that. So on a case-by-case scenario, in talking with an individual, we can tell you what that benefit might be for you. But broadly speaking, the benefit of having a testamentary trust set up that talks hand in hand with your will as part of this bubble wrap around everything structure is, not only do you not own anything from a straw person perspective because you've removed it and the company owns it or the trust owns it, you've now stepped back even one layer further that your estate owns it. So the estate is not a legal entity itself. It's, again, one of those things that needs a puppeteer to operate it, but you've effectively taken even one step further outside of things to further remove you from the asset. So it's an extra layer of insulation.
And quite complex at that. But if you're going into this development space and you, I guess, have a lot of assets already sitting in place and you're not quite sure what to do with them, certainly worth chatting to Amanda and the team as to whether or not that's an appropriate solution for you without going super deep into that. Amanda, thank you very much for your time. We're just coming up to the hour. I think people have got plenty of value out of that. So I want to thank you very much for, I guess, your candor in this and going through and dumbing it down for us mere mortals to be able to understand.
I wouldn't say mere mortals. I learned a thing or two from you during our conversation earlier that blew my hair back. So
Well, I don't have any hair, so it's easy to do that for me.
I've got plenty enough for both of us. Happy to share.
Yes. Very good. Well, I'm glad that I can inform, I guess the learned out there. So glad that I'll be able to help you there. For everyone else out there, folks, this has been, I guess, another Sunday session. We run these most Sundays, I guess, at 5 p.m. Brisbane time, depending upon where you are around the country. That might change from time to time, and I guess based on daylight saving. We also run, I guess, our networking events in 4 states now: Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. So if you are interested in coming to one of our meetups around the country, you can physically turn up to any of those, or if you're an Annie member, you can live stream those no matter where you go. So folks, it's been a pleasure. Amanda, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. So thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you on the next one. Till then, bye for now.